This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm Eben Jansen. The show, of course, live. It's broadcast from our studios here in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube right now with our whole show available on our YouTube channel all of the time. Today we look at the very latest from the Marikana Commission. We'll be live there shortly. What lies ahead for the embattled IEC chairperson is a question we'd like to answer. And then an update on the growing discontent amongst the residents of Soweto here in Gauteng. That's our top story. But first, let's look at the headlines with Catrine Malan.
Good morning and welcome. I'm Catrine Malan, and let's take a look at the news making headlines this morning. Meetings between platinum producers and labour union AMCU aimed at ending the 5-month-old strike in the sector will continue today, and producers say they are optimistic that a negotiated settlement can be reached. AMCU, together with AMPLATS, IMPLATS and Lonmin, reached an agreement in principle earlier this month, after which AMCU then submitted written responses with new demands. The Marikana Commission of Inquiry will resume this morning with a police witness only known as Mr. X continuing with his testimony. The commission was adjourned early on Friday after Mr. X asked to consult with his traditional healer. He was involved in the events prior to the police shooting dead 34 miners in August the 16th of 2012. 10 people, including 2 Lonmin security guards and 2 police officers, were also killed during the days of unrest. The motive behind the killing of at least 8 illegal miners shot execution style on the East Rand still remains unclear. It's unclear when the men were murdered, but officers were alerted to the crime at an abandoned mine in Benoni on Saturday. The men had sustained gunshot wounds to their heads and spent cartridges were recovered at the scene. Then moving to international news, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says the United States wants the Iraqi people to find an inclusive leadership to contain an Islamic insurgency, but Washington will not pick or choose who rules in Baghdad. Kerry was speaking in Cairo at the start of the Middle East tour, during which he is expected to visit Iraq. Then in sport, Portugal kept their World Cup dream alive after securing a 2-2 draw with the United States in the World Cup Group G. The result means that after 2 games, the US are in second place, level with Germany on 4 points, and Portugal are joint bottom with Ghana on 1 point. Algeria crushed South Korea 4-2 in a thrilling World Cup Group H clash, while Belgium secured a place in the last 16 after a 1-0 victory against Russia. Remember, all these top stories are available on our Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Eben.
Yeah, thank you very much, Catrine. Very good morning to you once again. Gauteng has been facing increasing tension amongst communities in township since the beginning of the month. On the 9th of June, Beckersdal residents gathered outside the Simunia Secondary School on the West Rand to protect their children after reported gang violence in their area. In Diepkloof, we saw the so-called bear bum protest. Police fired rubber bullets to disperse protesters who bared their bottoms during a service delivery protest. Then last week in Mafolo, Soweto, more than 100 people took to the streets, burning tyres and throwing stones at passing vehicles over power outages. Now, to shed more light on these underlying tensions is the Gauteng MEC of Human Settlements, Mr. Jacob Mamabolo. Mr. Mamabolo, thank you for joining us this morning.
Good morning to you and to the viewers.
Are these tensions, these growing tensions that we see, are they exaggerated tensions in the media?
Firstly, thank you for the opportunity to invite me this morning. I think the general context is that, and we have said this publicly, that the protests that we have seen in a number of communities, most of those issues that communities are raising are genuine issues. And that's simply because our country has experienced many years of oppression, of colonialism, of apartheid. And in that sense, the legacy of colonialism continues to linger on, it continues to live on. So it is in that context that we say that, look, the demands that people are raising, obviously, are legitimate. We have, however, seen in certain instances the use of genuine community demands grievances for opportunistic reasons.
Yeah.
And at this point, I'm pleased to say the provincial government and, of course, myself, we have already visited almost all these communities. I've met with the leaders of the communities you have shown in the insert. most of them went on very well. And I'm very much pleased with the positive response we have received from communities, the cooperation. They need to work with us to work collectively to resolve their issues.
You talk about opportunism playing a part in some of these protests. Is there a criminal element that's constantly on the lookout for these kinds of scenarios to then use this, as you say, that opportunity to get involved in criminality and lawlessness?
Absolutely, you're spot on. There are cases, and we can give examples. One of them is just the latest protest in Mofolo in Soweto. That protest came in the context of what is said to be load shedding.
Yeah.
And we sent the team, we sent one of our MMCs in the city of Johannesburg to interact with the community. One of the things that we're receiving from the ground, this is from the ordinary people on the ground, is that amongst the issues that were raised, it's not just power outages.
Yeah.
But apparently there was also an attempt to remove the sitting councillor, and the power outages were used to hide that issue. So you do indeed have cases where demands of the people are used for wrong reasons. Secondly, let me take the opportunity also to strongly condemn the use of violence, looting, vandalism, to express legitimate demands. I believe that our country has made significant progress, but unfortunately, the violent culture of the apartheid past, the backward culture of vandalism, of looting, continue to persist, and it undermines the good work that we're doing in a democracy. I would like to say, moving forward, we should have a mobilization of our communities, of our people, to say, side by side with the progress that we're making in a number of areas, let us fight the backward culture of violence, of destruction of properties such as libraries, clinics, and all that. That culture does not belong to the current epoch. So you do have criminality, and we're calling on law enforcement agencies, on communities, on all the people of our province and the country to make sure that we fight consistently against the culture of violence, of looting, of vandalism. That culture has no place in our democracy.
Do you juxtapose that, of course, with the legitimate concerns that some residents have? And in Mofolo, you had the scenario with the power outages. Unfortunately, it also coincides with the coldest time of the year, and people are have legitimate concerns. There's been a bit of a blame game played. Eskom this and Eskom's been blamed. What's the latest in the discussions around the power outages, and what does the future hold for the residents in that area?
Let me say that particularly with respect to power outages, one thing that I've seen and which I've heard and is there on the ground is that there are perceptions about load shedding. In certain cases, people, once there is a problem relating to electricity, they say is load shedding. In certain cases, there are illegal connections. But the question that I'm raising, and I'd like to raise very consistently moving forward, is ourselves as government, including Eskom, all of us. Whenever communities raises issues, whether from factually or from perceptions, I think it's important that we move swiftly, promptly, and decisively to engage with these communities. The reason why I want to emphasize the point that the concerns of communities are legitimate is that when you talk to them quick, fast, and you interact with them, you engage them, they do understand. Yeah. And that one good example is the protest in Diepkloof. The
bear bum protest.
Well, I would like to call it a community struggle. I would like to call it part of people's struggle. I wouldn't want to put my views on how it was done. Yeah. But the point I'm trying to make is when I met with the community leaders and say, let's look at what the issues are, the protest came to an end. The same with Beggarsdal residents. Whenever we engage with them, and I'm pleased to also use the opportunity to say, today at 11 o'clock, I have a very important meeting with the residents of Beggarsdal led by their committee. We'll be looking at some of the issues relating to housing in the area. So in many cases, when you interact with people, you're able to make progress, you're able to manage the issues, and you're able to move forward. So that tells you there are genuine cases, and people are able to isolate.
The message, though, Mr. MEC, is a very important one. It seems in South Africa, people seem to believe that as soon as they take to the street and behave in a violent manner, things happen for them in their communities. Things get done when they turn violent, and when things are out of control, suddenly steps are taken for their problems to be solved. This is just the way that I read it at the moment. How do you change that? And how do you engage people from not engaging in that?
My plea to the people of our province is as follows, is that firstly, as the fifth administration, and of course President Zuma and our Premier have made the point, let's hear communities. Let's interact with communities. Our doors are open. So the challenge that I'm sitting with, and I'd like us to address very decisively, is interact with people proactively to make sure that many of the issues that they raise, we can deal with them without them having to resort to violent protests. I'm worried about that because unless we deal with these issues promptly and decisively, we ourselves are contributing to the perpetuation of the apartheid violent culture.
Yeah.
So I'd like to say to communities, at this point, this is a democratic government. The ANC-led government is for the people of this country. There's no need for people to engage in protest as the first step. We have a responsibility to make sure that our systems on the ground are able to tell us in advance that there's a grievance in a particular area. We deal with it decisively and promptly. And I think this will not be simple. It's not just pressing a button, and then the lights goes on. It's a systematic, consistent process that we'll have to engage in to make sure that we act proactively. But I must say I'm pleased, although this was reactive, that we have managed very well most of the so-called service delivery protests. And by the way, this concept of service delivery, I think it's a concept we need to look at because conceptually, I think it perpetuates the apartheid violent culture. And I think at some point we'll come back to you to say, how did we conceptualize and look at this concept? Because we're creating a scenario of people having to sit and wait for the so-called Mr. or Miss Service Delivery to come in like a postperson, and they were alienating people. We have to form partnerships with people. We have to work with them. And I think this concept of a service delivery, I think there's something wrong with it. We've got to look at it.
Yeah. Well, Mr. Mamapolo, thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the opportunity.
That's the Gauteng MEC for Housing Settlements, Mr. Jacob Mamapolo, joining us here in Johannesburg this morning. Now, moving on. The Independent Electoral Commission chairperson, Panzi Tlakula's fate is now in the hands of Parliament. The relevant committee of the National Assembly would consider and decide on further steps following the court's recommendation that the IEC boss, Panzi Tlakula, be removed from her position. Judge Lotta Wepner concluded that Tlakula had committed misconduct to an extent warranting her removal from office. The application was brought earlier this year by several opposition parties seeking Tlakula's resignation from the IEC before the May 7 elections. They believe she acted improperly over the leasing of the Electoral Commission of South Africa's headquarters in Centurion in 2009. The IEC chairperson has flatly refused to cooperate with forensic auditors and is still clinging on to her position. Former Professor of Constitutional Law, Marinus Wichers, joins us from our studio in Pretoria now. Good morning, Professor. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, thank you.
Professor, what do you make of the court's decision with regards to the IEC chairperson?
Well, it's very reasonable. It's very clear. It says very clearly what it's all about. You know, it say the constitutional requirements for an appointment such as a commissioner is completely, without fear, prejudice, or anything. But in essence, it means an honest person. And the court looked into this whole matter and said, but there's a strong feeling and evidence by the public protector and the Treasury investigation that the chairman, Panzi Tlakula, is not, in terms of the Constitution, an honest person. She's not acting without fear, prejudice or any other motives and so on. She's not honest. And one can say, of course, yes, but the leasing of this premises has got nothing to do with electoral matters, and it's not interfered with we had a very, very good election. So what's it all about? But the Constitution is very clear that the commissioners must be, as I've said, completely honest. And on that ground, there is nothing to say against the judgment, in my view.
What should Ms. Catrine do now? Resign on her own, or should she be fired? What do you think?
Well, of course, anybody can resign. Even if you're a president, you can resign. So that's a choice. The other thing is, I heard that she said she's going to take it to the Constitutional Court. Now, frankly, I can't see what the Constitutional Court can do in this matter, because there is not, in this whole matter, in this whole controversy, there's no violation of any constitutional provision. So I don't think there's any recourse, or there's going to be any help from the Constitutional Court. What she can do is, of course, take it on review, the decision of the Labour Court, but then she can go to the Court of Appeal and say, take it on review, but it's going to be very expensive, long, protracted, and it's not going to help much. What she's got to do is to put her case, and she feels very strongly about this case, why she doesn't agree with the Public Protector and the Treasury report. She put her case before the Parliamentary Commission. And the Parliamentary Commission, if she can convince them that these reports and the court decision was wrong or was not, didn't take all the facts into consideration, then the report of the Commission to the Parliament. The Parliament has to decide at the end whether she be removed or stay in her office. And so her recourse at this stage would put her case before the Parliamentary Commission.
And what about government's position right now, Professor? Is it not time for South Africa to show that we are serious about dealing with corruption?
Oh, sure, I'm glad to say that this court decision, and of course, starting with the Public Protector's report, is exactly pointing in that direction, and it's now up to government to act very strongly and in this Parliamentary Commission, because of course you can understand the majority of the members of this commission would be government supporters. But here is an opportunity to take this whole matter very, very seriously and say, no, we can't afford to have somebody in the Electoral Commission who's not complying with the provisions of, of honesty.
And finally, Professor, in your opinion, has this ruling cast a shadow over the May 2014 elections in South Africa?
No, as I said, it's this decision in itself does not cast any, shadow on the electoral, on the election, the past elections. That went extremely well, and from all over the world, people were much impressed by the way the electoral process was running. But you can say, and that is the crux of the matter, a commissioner who's not honest, who hasn't got the integrity. In this case, the election went extremely well, and there is no aspersion or anything of corruption. But such a commissioner could be, if he or she is not completely honest, use of the electoral process in future, because there are going to be other elections also in our democracy, and that person cannot be trusted in that position. And that's the crux of the whole matter.
Professor, thank you for that contribution today. That is a former professor of constitutional law, Marinus Vickers, who joined us, who joins us from Pretoria. Thank you.
You're welcome. Bye.
Well, time now for us to take a look at what's happening elsewhere in the world. The front pages of the world, that is. In the United Kingdom, The Independent reporting on the latest regarding the situation in Iraq. Sunni militants seized more towns yesterday as the crisis in Iraq deepened. The Baghdad government desperately tried to fight back. Then, a war of words when Stephen Gerrard and Roy Hodgson reacted furiously to claims from Harry Redknapp that players at Tottenham Hotspur asked him to withdraw them from senior England duty while he was in charge at White Hart Lane. The England manager and his captain urged Redknapp to identify the players to whom he was referring. A beautiful picture of US soccer fans supporting their team who drew 2-2 against Portugal in their World Cup clash. That's on the front page of the Miami Herald. Let's take a look now at what you're talking about on social media. It's Monday morning, so people are quite serious, I would think. It's cold up here in Johannesburg. Prince Sam says, Takula is wasting everyone's time. Electoral court has a right to remove her. She must stop being dramatic, says Prince Sam. Osama bin Pascal says, if Takula needs financial assistance for her legal woes, she should be prepared to finish security in case her appeal fails. Well, we've just heard what the professor said, is that the best chance is to take it to Parliament, where it's heading anyhow. Spiwe says, why is Mosoto Moepa footing the legal bill of this discredited character? Takula says, he must be investigated and fired as well, says Piwo. Chris says, is it necessary for Takula to appeal? Will she have any dignity if she does so? Does she have any sense of decency or self-respect? Those are key questions being asked by Chris this morning. Then, Anoni Famous says, Gogo, Takula needs to sit down far away from the IEC Assembly, says Anoni Famous. Those are some of the views of, you at home. Right now, of course, at SABC Newsroom on Twitter. That's where you can find us. We also have a wonderful Facebook page where we've got all the latest breaking news. Time now for us to take a short commercial break. We'll be back shortly. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News.
Murder accused Oscar Pistorius could face at least 30 days in psychiatric evaluation.
Mr. Pistorius has a long history of generalized anxiety disorder that appears to have been increasing with time.
The state can ask for such an evaluation according to Section 78A of the Criminal Procedures Act.
It is likely to have commenced at the age of 11 months when he was hospitalized and underwent bilateral below-knee amputation.
So you agree with me if I say that he foresaw the possibility that he might have to shoot when he armed himself and approached danger?
Yes.
Make sure you don't miss Your World, weekdays between 11 and 12 midnight.
Very good morning to you. You're with Newsroom on SABC News. Time for us to take a look at one of our top stories this morning. The Marikana Commission of Inquiry will resume with the testimony of police witness known as Mr. X today. He was involved in the events prior to police shooting dead 34 miners on August the 16th in 2012. 10 people, including 2 Lonman security guards and 2 police officers, were also killed during the days of unrest. For the latest, we're now crossing live to SABC reporter on the commission, Nozen Tombi Mia. A very good morning, Tombi. How are you?
Good morning, Eben. I'm good, thank you.
Seems a big day ahead of us at the commission. Just give us a little update. What can we expect?
Well, we are expecting the testimony of Mr. X to continue. You will remember last week, Friday, proceedings were halted very suddenly after Mr. X complained that he was feeling unwell and requested that he go and consult with his sangoma because he felt that he was being bewitched by certain people or several people in the commission. So it's going to be very interesting to see today whether or not Mr. X feels confident enough to continue with today's proceedings, or whether we'll see a repeat of Friday and he'll feel still unwell enough to continue with today's proceedings.
What's the feeling? Has these antics cast aspersions on the character of the witness and then on his testimony in general thus far?
Well, in terms of his testimony is undoubted. On Friday, we spoke to several of the miners, obviously off camera, and they have confirmed that most of what he said in his testimony is completely true. But what has happened with his unceremonious decision to stop with the proceedings on Friday is that it's created a lot of unhappiness with the widows and some of the miners who are here, because it means that it's one more day added to the commission. And you do know that the commission itself doesn't have enough time. They've only got about a month left before they have to wrap up proceedings, and the commissioners have to now give feedback and their findings on what has happened over the past year and a half of the proceeding commissions that they have reviewed. So in terms of him having halted the proceedings of this particular commission, it's been met with a lot of irritation and griping from the widows and from the miners themselves.
Mr. X, do we expect Mr. X to come forward today and maybe in his whole testimony shed a little bit more light on the policemen and security guards that were killed during that period of unrest?
Well, this particular testimony for Mr. X must be a very trying time, because you will remember that his face has been shown in the proceedings. As much as the media has not been allowed to take visuals of his face, the miners themselves know who he is, they know what he looks like, and this has created a lot of anxiety for him. It's understandable that these are the people that he was in cahoots with, and now he's turned against them, and he's telling everybody from start to finish what exactly had happened. So it's extremely exhausting for him. It's extremely trying for him. We do know that in the public gallery on Friday, some of the sentiment that had come out from some of the mine workers who are in the public gallery, what they've said is they know who he is, they know where he lives, they know his name, they know his family. So you can imagine that things like that are playing on Mr. X's mind, and it's going to be extremely difficult for him to continue as he has, giving his testimony without fear, without favor. So he's hopeful that the police will continue protecting him. He'll stay in police custody up until such a time as this particular commission ends and the criminal proceedings have been concluded. But it is going to be an extremely trying time for him right now.
Listen, Tommy, the commission itself, is there a sense growing in the media and amongst those attending that it's skewed a little bit to the death of miners only and tends to forget the other people that died during this period of unrest?
Well, not at all. I think that the biggest thing is that there were 34 miners that died in one day. That is a big number, no matter how you look at it. At the end of the day, these 34 miners were killed by police bullets. And that is a big issue that people cannot get away from. That's a big issue that the media cannot get away from. But that still does not mean that we have forgotten about the 2 security guards who were killed by the miners in the Muti ritual. We cannot forget about some of the other mine workers themselves, some of the NUM members that have been killed. But the numbers, 34 miners having been killed versus the number of about 5 individuals that were killed in skirmishes leading up to the date of the 16th of August, 34 miners take trumps over the media.
Amnesty is one discussion that came up last week when we were looking at the deal that's being meted out on the Platinum Belt. Is there talk, is there a sense that amnesty is on the table for all of those that were involved in this process and that they want amnesty?
That's That's such an interesting observation, Eben. At the moment, there's been no talks of amnesty because you remember that once the commission proceedings conclude, the commissioners themselves still need to make a finding and to make recommendations. Once that process has concluded, there's still a criminal process that still needs to carry on. You'll remember over 100 minors were arrested by police, and we still haven't had any feedback yet from the police officers themselves who shot at the 34 minors. So it's still very hush-hush at the moment. Nobody yet is saying anything about amnesty, but it wouldn't come as a surprise if it comes out from the recommendations of the commissioners that there should be some blanket amnesty over the people who come forward and explain what it is that they did in their part. So amnesty is not off the table at the moment, but it's not something that the commissioners are speaking about. It's not something that the lawyers themselves are speaking about. So it will be very interesting to see whether or not amnesty is granted to the miners who ended up killing some of their fellow mine workers or the Lonman security guards, or whether there'll be any amnesty to the police officers who shot down those 34 miners.
Thanks, Ntombi. That's Ntombi Mia coming to you live from the Marikana Commission. Of course, proceedings will continue today. Mr. X expected to continue on the stand after last week being plagued by demons, it seems. Let's have a look now at what you say again on social media. Please remember, at SABC Newsroom, that's where you can get involved with us. Send us pictures. Pumelelo says, if a strike makes you lose over 10 billion in wages for your kids, it's time to call it quits. He says, just saying, no one is winning at this point. Stop the platinum strike says, all we want is the right to work. If you have the right to strike, give others the right to work. That is a genuine question there. And then Andrew Pike says, AMCU, what happened to old-fashioned good faith bargaining? Your members are paying the price for your bad faith and inflated egos, says Andrew Pike. Kharejwani says, Richard's Karen, I think we will fall on our backs to see who is involved once assets are sold off, or maybe not. In my humble opinion, AMCU is just a front, he says. I don't know why people are making the platinum strike a huge issue. It's simple. Give workers their 12,500 rand. See, it is a huge issue, Ms. Pillay. It's a massive issue. Millions of people is affected by the strike. More importantly, the economy of our nation is in the firing line. So it's a massive issue. Let's take a look now at what's happening on our Facebook page. Of course, all the stories are being dealt with in detail on our Facebook page. There you can read more on President Jacob Zuma, who will be leading South Africa's delegation to the 23rd ordinary session of the African Union in Equatorial Guinea this week. Also there, a story of the 7 illegal miners who are now believed to have been shot dead at a disused mine at Benoni on the East Rand. And you can read more on government's reaffirming its decision not to directly influence the wage negotiations between trade union AMCU and mining houses. Then, in our YouTube clip of the day, today in 1996, Reverend Desmond Tutu retired as Archbishop of Cape Town and the head of the Anglican Church here in South Africa. According to him, his retirement was a way of offloading some of the work he had been doing in order to concentrate on the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. In today's war-ravaged world we live in, a place where peace is only an ideal we strive for. Tutu made a memorable speech last year at the 3rd annual Desmond Tutu International Peace Lecture that still holds truth today.
I've said, I'm so glad I'm not God. But, can you imagine what it must be like to be God? I really feel sorry for God. Looking down and saying, those are my children. In Syria, those who use chemical weapons are my children. And those who are dying are my children. And God, you know what? God is crying.
You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. We'll be back after a short commercial break.
I once saw a flower blossom through 27 prison bars of yesterday's unjust flames. I felt an old woman's anticipation for the country's first open elections. And I heard the loud celebrations of that flower's historic inauguration. I was there when Unity sang of how the Springbok never held anything back, and we saw a first-time band of 11 men, Shibobo possibility throughout the land. At the foot of Africa, time remembers how truth can reconcile a people. We carved our name into space, and on the world stage, our art stood united. When we blow that vuvuzela, the whole world goes into a trance. And even in that tearful hour of the flower's separation, we are a people who see the music and hear the flowers dance. SABC, sharing 20 years of inspiration.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. So let's have a look at the news making headlines this morning. Meetings between platinum producers and labour union AMCU aimed at ending the 5-month-old strike in the sector will continue today, and producers say they are optimistic that a negotiated settlement can be reached. AMCU, together with AMPATS, IMPATS and Lonman, reached an agreement in principle earlier this month, after which AMCU then submitted written responses with new demands. The Marikana Commission of Inquiry will resume this morning with a police witness only known as Mr. X continuing with his testimony. The commission was adjourned early on Friday after Mr. X asked to consult with his traditional healer. He was involved in the events prior to the police shooting 34 miners in August the 16th in 2012. 10 people, including 2 Lonman security guards and 2 police officers, were also killed during the days of unrest. The motive behind the killing of at least 8 illegal miners shot execution style on the East Rand still remains unclear. It's unclear when the men were murdered, but officers were alerted to the crime at an abandoned mine in Benoni on Saturday. The men had sustained gunshot wounds to their heads and spent cartridges were recovered at the scene. International news, U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry says the United States wants the Iraqi people to find an inclusive leadership to contain an Islamic insurgency, but Washington will not pick or choose who rules in Baghdad. Kerry was speaking in Cairo at the start of a Middle East tour, during which he is expected to visit Iraq. And lastly, sport. Portugal kept their World Cup dream alive after securing a 2-2 draw with the United States in World Cup Group G match. The result means that after 2 games, the US are in second place, level with Germany on 4 points, and Portugal are joint bottom with Ghana at 1 point. Algeria crushed South Korea 4-2 in a thrilling World Cup Group H clash, while Belgium secured a place in the last 16 after a 1-0 victory against Russia. Remember, all these top stories are available on our Facebook page. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. And Eben, back to you.
Yeah, thanks, Catrine. Recently, the Gauteng Transport Department said it was taking a second look at possibly replacing e-tolls by more efficient user pay mechanisms. These alternatives include fuel levies, provincial tax, or even shadow tolling. 6 months after launching the e-toll system in Gauteng, the opposition to Urban Tolling Alliance says this could be a step in the right direction, as these alternatives attract virtually zero administration costs and have high compliance levels. Now, to talk to us about this, we are joined here in studio by ATA Chairman Wayne Devenage. Good morning, Wayne. Thanks for joining us.
A pleasure, Eben.
Your views on these latest developments?
Yes. Well, very encouraging. We welcome the fact. I think what's starting to be realized by the authorities is that the e-tolling system is not working. It has less than 40% compliance. And in a user pay system, you need all users to pay. And you've got to unpack why do 60% plus not pay. What are the issues? We've unpacked a lot of that. We've done a lot of research. It's on our website, a 30-page comprehensive document. We researched around the world as well. And we've always maintained that the fuel levy is a very efficient, 100% compliant, zero admin costs.
Yeah.
And it's equitable. Every time you or I start our vehicles, we pay towards the use of the roads.
Yeah.
The argument that, well, why should Gauteng's roads be picked up by by the rest of the country. Well, these are South Africa's roads we've always maintained. So it's very encouraging to hear that they are thinking along these lines.
Yeah, one never hears the reverse argument. Oh, you guys make too much money in Gauteng to support some of the work we do in the rest of the country.
Exactly.
I wanted to ask you about the user pays principle. Do you accept the user pays principle as a way forward in this e-tolling saga?
Yeah, we accept the most efficient user pays principle, absolutely. So government's role in society is to do what's best for society to reduce the burden and increase prosperity. And there are far more efficient ways than e-tolling, certainly on social infrastructure and economic infrastructure such as the Gauteng Freeway.
Now, compliance has been a problem, less than 40% you say. Do you think government has reached a point where they realise that the e-toll scheme will never achieve high compliance?
Yeah, I think so, because without the buy-in of society, these systems fail around the world. And it's not just here. We've done a lot of research, as I said, and it's around the world they have failed. Even in Hong Kong, they tried to launch twice, very similarly, after pumping millions of rands into a marketing campaign, just as SANRAL is doing right now, and it failed. So, we think that that's going to play out now.
So the smart money is that it's not going to work. But we hear, though, that this system is trying to be policed at the moment. Summonses will be issued to those who don't pay, but we never seem to see this happen. Is this simply threats, or do you see there being a step up on the horizon in these campaigns?
Well, yeah, we think that might take place. We certainly do hope and believe that SANRAL should hold back on any attempts to prosecute. You can imagine trying to prosecute a poor person who just cannot afford it but needs to travel on these roads, how a judge might think along those lines. So these are intimidatory tactics right now. They've tried the carrot with some amnesty or some reduction in past unpaid fees. And the stick approach will come now with the prosecution process or summonses. ARTA is certainly going to turn to the public to defend that matter if indeed it ever gets that far.
I want to talk about SANRAL and where they are at the moment. Do you get a sense that they are on board with changing the way that money is collecting, or even using a completely different system?
They haven't sent any signals along those lines right now. They continue to man these roadblocks, so to speak, and put up their signage there in, as we said, this intimidatory process. We have wind of the fact that they intend to continue down the road of summonsing and prosecution, hopefully to scare people into compliance. So we'd like to know exactly what their views are in this regard, and of what Ismail Wadi, the MEC, has stated, and the local government around taking a relook, a rethink, and finding more efficient methods.
Now, Wayne, we've got some of our viewers that send in their views on social media and on our Facebook page and so on. And one of the key scenarios that come out of this story is that some motorists are claiming that they are asked at roadblocks if they have e-tags. Is this legal?
No, it's not. It's not a legal requirement to have an e-tag. So if the police are asking that, they would be asking out of inquisitiveness, really, as opposed to why don't you have one, because they don't have to have one.
Now, the whole thing, as ARTA, what is it that you would want to hear from the Gauteng MEC of Transport on this matter right now and then going forward?
Great. We'd like to hear them convince government to set aside this decision so that we can amicably and together with all the stakeholders find the best solution for society, because we know we have to pay for these roads.
Yeah.
We know that we have to get SANRAL building roads. That's what they're good at. They're good in their engineering space. And let's find the best solution, because right now this is certainly not the best solution. All the money that is being collected is going into the collection process and nothing is going into the tarmac, and that is a recipe for disaster.
Well, thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Chairman of ARTA, Wayne Durbanich.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Eben. Thank you.
Less than 40% compliance. That is a recipe for disaster at the moment. Now, at least 20 Mpumalanga initiation school applications were withdrawn after they were found to not conform with the required standards. So far, 4 young men have died since the start of the winter initiation season this year, according to Deputy Traditional Affairs Minister Obed Bapela. 3 in Mpumalanga and 1 in the Eastern Cape. Last Friday, Eastern Cape traditional leaders in partnership with the province health officials launched the start of the initiation season in Mthatha. Congress of traditional leaders, together with health authorities, have vowed for 0 deaths this season and will monitor initiation schools on a daily basis, they say. The NPA has confirmed that 23 people will be prosecuted for the deaths of young men during last year's initiation season in Mpumalanga. From the Friendly City, we are joined by Abongile Dumako to talk about the strong tradition in the Eastern Cape of a passage to manhood. Very good morning to you, Abongile.
Good morning, Eben.
Just tell us, where are we now and what prompted the authorities to launch the initiation season and what came out of it?
Okay, basically, Eben, is the ever-rising death toll of initiates within the Eastern Cape province. You'll recall that from 2012, there were about 67 initiates who died in the bush, and of course, the number rose to 83 last year. So indeed, that does come as a concern for authorities here in the Eastern Cape, especially the Traditional Affairs organization within the province. Now, last week on Friday in Mthatha, the authorities, that is now government officials, your traditional leaders, and of course health officials gathered there in Mthatha to workshop, all the involved communities and all the involved stakeholders in the process of initiation to just try and workshop them as to what must be done, what processes to follow in a bid to try and curb this ever-rising death in our initiation schools. Basically, there's thousands of boys took to the mountain this past weekend. They had to go through all necessary processes that is being monitored health-wise as to are they physically fit, are they ready to go through that 6 weeks that they're going to spend in the bush. So basically that was the very reason behind the fact that they needed to launch this initiation period.
Just tell us about the tradition of the passage to manhood in the Eastern Cape, which is very strong. For boys, there's really no other option but to go under the knife, as it were.
Indeed, I would say it's an old custom that has been sort of practiced for many years, and for a boy, if I may say, to be recognized as a man in a community, you need to have gone through an initiation process, and of course you need to be 18 years and older for you to be fit enough and emotionally ready to go through that process. So to an extent, boys are sort of bound to go through the process for them to be recognized in their community as being men. Because at the initiation school, basically you get to be taught the basis of being a man and what is expected of you as a man in terms of when you go back to the community, you need to come back as a changed person. So that's basically the very main reason behind the fact that boys are ought to go through to the bush. Like myself, some years ago when I went, I knew that I needed to be physically, in terms of appearance, in terms of how I conduct myself within the community, there needed to be a change to show that I've spent a couple of weeks, 6 weeks in the bush without nobody else but myself and the fellow initiates, of course, and of course the surgeons and everybody else that is involved there, just to make sure that they mold these young men to become a better person in future.
Now, the deaths, of course, have been very worrying. We've seen all over the country many deaths. There's going to be a clampdown on illegal schools. Are the authorities confident that they'll be able to stick to the 0 deaths this year?
Well, a part of last Friday's workshop in Mthatha was to actually to come up with other alternatives as to what could be done to try and clamp down all the illegal initiation schools. Because what has come as a challenge here in the Eastern Cape, especially in the Pondoland area, is that there are fly-by-night initiation schools where you find a boy who went to the bush just 2 years ago claiming that they are ready and wise enough to be able to conduct, the same custom to fellow boys. So basically they want to clamp down all those unlawful incidents. So the appeal to the communities throughout the province was to be able to open up and report all those, illegal fly-by-night initiation schools in a bid to try and help the authorities and meet them halfway to try and come up with a valuable sort of solution and move forward, making it a point that there is no deaths at all in as far as the circumcision is concerned.
Finally, the cooperation between traditional leaders and health authorities, is that working now and is that a positive?
Yes, it is working in the sense that now a platform has been created for different communities throughout the Eastern Cape province to be able to reach out, your immediate, local chief, the House of Traditional Leaders has since been visible in all the rural areas in a bid to try and make people aware of the fact that they have a right when something doesn't go well within the initiation process and in the bush, especially the parents, because it always comes as a concern whether or not your boy will come back from the bush. Now, the plan now is to reach out to the communities to be able to create a platform for them to say, hold on, something is not going right here. Authorities intervene. Health officials, if there's a need, intervene. Government intervene so that we can have a sort of a conducive environment for those young boys who are sort of keen and wanting to go to the bush and become men.
Bungile, thank you very much for joining us today and give us an update on what has been a very worrying story in South Africa. It looks like we've got a handle on it this year. That's Bungile Dumako joining us live from Port Elizabeth. Thank you very much. Now, time for a final look at what's on social media, what you're talking about. I think it's World Cup. At SABC Newsroom is where you can send us World Cup. Alexei Lalas, of course, former US soccer player. It's beautiful that so many are celebrating America today through a soccer game. Have fun, he says. Kayla says, why do the best World Cup games have to happen during the day this week? Responsibilities are overrated, she said. And then Dubuchi says, I really think this year World Cup have a great chance coming to Africa for the first time in history. It's been in Africa, my friend. South Africa, 2010. Hello. There, well, we're going to read another one, but we have run out of time. Good morning to you. Newsroom comes live from Johannesburg in South Africa to you every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. The show repeats at 2 in the afternoon with the rebroadcast then at 5 a.m. the following morning. We're also streaming live on YouTube with the show available on our YouTube channel all of the time. This is SABC News. You have been watching Newsroom. We love it here in the morning.